In a quiet Vermont town, snow made everything look peaceful from the outside. But behind one beautiful winter lodge, old rescue dogs were being counted by cost instead of called by name. When retired ranger Wyatt Bramwell found an elderly woman fallen in the snow, his old canine shepherd, Harlan, knew her fear was real. She carried only a worn notebook, a broken collar, and the name of one missing dog she refused to forget. What began as one small act of mercy soon forced an entire town to face the truth it had been avoiding. And before winter ended, one open door would decide whether the forgotten still had a place to come home. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from, leave your thoughts, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Winter made Alder Creek look kinder than it was. From a distance, the Vermont town seemed carved out of quiet light. Snow lay soft on the roofs of old clapboard houses. The lake beyond the lower road had frozen into a pale sheet of silver, catching the last weak sun of afternoon. Along Main Street, the diners and rental shops had already switched on their yellow window lights, making warm squares against the blue-white cold. Middle-aged couples in wool coats crossed the sidewalks with cameras around their necks. Retired visitors stood near the frozen overlook, admiring the mountains as if the whole place had been arranged for their peace. Wyatt Bramwell knew better than to trust a pretty winter. At 59, he had seen snow cover broken branches, lost trails, blood, tire tracks, and fear. For more than 30 years, he had worked as a federal forest ranger, the kind of man people called when a hunter vanished before dusk, when hikers ignored weather reports, when a storm turned a familiar trail into a white room with no doors. He had followed footprints until they disappeared. He had carried strangers out of ravines. He had knocked on cabins where no answer came. Now he lived alone on the edge of Alder Creek, in a small cedar cabin where the woods began to climb toward the ridge and the back road sloped down toward the frozen lake. He had chosen the place because it was quiet. That was what he told people. The truth was less noble. Quiet did not ask him to explain why his wife's side of the bed stayed untouched. Quiet did not ask why he had stopped going to the diner on Thursday mornings. Quiet did not look at him with pity when he stood too long in the hardware aisle, holding a box of nails he did not need. Quiet let a man disappear, politely. Wyatt stood at the kitchen sink that afternoon, rinsing a coffee mug he had not really used. He was tall, broad-shouldered, still solid from a lifetime of work outdoors, though age had taken the sharpness from his strength and replaced it with something slower. His hair had gone salt and pepper, and a little too long at the back. A short, silver-flecked beard roughened his jaw. His hazel eyes, brown and green, depending on the light, had the habit of studying a thing before trusting it. A brass pocket compass lay on the windowsill above the sink. It had belonged to his late wife's father, then to her, and after she passed, somehow to him. He rarely used it. The needle trembled inside its scratched glass whenever the house settled or the wind pressed hard against the window. Still, Wyatt kept it where he could see it. Some objects did not tell you where to go. They only reminded you that direction could be lost. A heavy sigh came from the back door. Wyatt turned. Harlan stood on the braided rug by the mudroom, his black and tan body angled toward the outside. The German shepherd was 8 years old, large-framed and deep-chested, with a black saddle across his back and warm gold along his legs and chest. Silver had begun to dust the fur around his muzzle. The tip of his left ear bent slightly from an old injury, giving him a permanent look of weary patience. Once, Harlan had moved through snow like water. Now he stood carefully, weight shifted off his right hip. Some mornings he paused before the porch steps as if measuring the pain against the need to go down. Wyatt had built a small wooden ramp and pretended it was for hauling firewood. Harlan knew better. "You hear something?" Wyatt asked. Harlan did not bark. He rarely wasted sound. He stared at the back door, ears lifted, body still except for the faint tremor in his hind leg. Wyatt dried his hands on a towel and listened. At first, there was only wind pushing through the pines, the soft tick of sleet against the window, and somewhere, far off, a snowmobile whining along the lake road. Then came a different sound, not loud, not even clear. A dragging scrape, followed by a thin knock. Wyatt's hand went still on the towel. Old training did not return dramatically. It simply stepped into the room and took its place. He crossed the kitchen without hurry, pulled on his boots, took his field jacket from the peg, and opened the back door. Cold came in hard enough to steal breath. Harlan moved first, stiff but determined, down the ramp and onto the porch. Wyatt followed him into the pale wash of late-afternoon snow. The sky had turned the color of tin. Beyond the yard, the narrow road to the lake curved between white banks and bare maples. At first, Wyatt saw nothing. Then Harlan lowered his head and took 3 slow steps toward the roadside ditch. A woman lay there. She was small, nearly swallowed by her navy wool coat, one side of her body sunk into the snow where she had fallen. A red scarf had come loose from her neck and trailed across the ground like a torn flag. Her gray hair had slipped from a low bun, and snow clung to it in delicate, cruel crystals. One thin arm was wrapped around a faded cloth bag pressed hard against her chest. Wyatt moved quickly then. "Ma'am?" He knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened halfway. They were pale blue and frightened, not confused in the vague way of sleep, but fixed on something behind him that was not there. "No," she whispered. "Don't call them." "I'm not calling anybody yet," Wyatt said, though he already knew he would have to call someone. "You're cold. I'm going to get you inside." Her fingers tightened on the bag. "Not Northstar," she said. The name made no sense in the moment, and then it did. Northstar Lodge sat above town like a postcard come to life, all timber beams, sleigh bells, snow trails, and rescue dog advertisements. Wyatt had seen their signs at the diner: rescue dogs, second chances. He did not ask questions in the snow. He lifted the woman carefully. She weighed less than she should have. Harlan stayed close on Wyatt's left side, not crowding, not sniffing, just watching the road as if the cold itself might follow them home. Inside, Wyatt settled her on the sofa near the wood stove and wrapped 2 blankets around her shoulders. He brought warm water, not hot. He checked her pulse, her breathing, the color in her fingers. She was trembling hard, but not broken. No obvious head wound. No blood that he could see. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked at him as if returning from a long distance. "Mabel," she said. "Mabel Corcoran." Wyatt knew the name in the loose way small towns knew names. Widow. Lived down on Willow Bend. Used to take in unwanted dogs. People said she had more heart than sense, which usually meant she had more heart than money. "I'm Wyatt Bramwell," he said. "You fell near my road. I'm calling Dr. Naomi Klein." Mabel's eyes sharpened. "Not a doctor." "She's a vet," Wyatt said. That calmed her more than he expected. He made the call while Harlan settled near the sofa. The dog did not put his head on Mabel's lap. He did not force comfort on her. He lowered himself slowly to the rug, stretched one front paw forward, and rested his chin near her shaking hand. Mabel looked at him. For the first time since Wyatt had found her face changed. Not into relief, exactly. Relief was too large a word. But something inside her loosened by a thread. "He knows," she whispered. Wyatt glanced at Harlan. He knows when someone's scared. Mabel closed her eyes. That's enough. Doctor. Naomi Klein arrived 20 minutes later in a dark green parka, boots crusted with snow, medical bag in one hand, and irritation at the weather in the other. She was 46, compact and strong, with brown hair tied low, and the blunt manner of someone who had learned that panic helped no living creature. Most of Alder Creek trusted her with their animals, even the people who disliked being told they were wrong. "You find trouble," Naomi said to Wyatt as she stepped inside. "Trouble fell in my ditch." "That's usually how it introduces itself." She checked Mabel with quick, practiced care. Mild exposure, exhaustion, bruising along one elbow. No sign that she needed an ambulance unless her condition worsened. Mabel resisted every question until Naomi noticed the cloth bag. "What's in there?" Naomi asked gently. Mabel pulled it closer. Wyatt expected refusal. Instead, the old woman looked at Harlan, then at Wyatt, then slowly opened the bag. The first thing she removed was a notebook. Its blue cloth cover had worn pale at the corners. A strip of fabric served as a bookmark. The pages inside were thick with handwriting in blue ink, names, dates, small notes, little marks in the margins. Juneau. Hates metal doors. Sleeps better with cedar chips. Otis. Old hunter. Left hip stiff. Likes sunlight. Birch. Eats only if someone sits nearby. Lottie. Flinches at raised voices. Wyatt felt something in his chest tighten, though he could not have said why. Mabel took out a collar next. Brown leather cracked with age, the buckle dulled by use. A small tag hung from the ring. Juneau. Naomi's expression shifted, not into alarm, but into attention. There were other things in the bag. 2 cut pieces of worn collar strap, a copy of a transfer form with Northstar Lodge printed at the top, and a folded brochure showing healthy dogs pulling a sled through perfect snow beneath the words, "Rescue Dogs, Second Chances." Wyatt did not touch anything at first. A lifetime outdoors had taught him that disturbing a thing too soon could ruin what it was trying to tell you. Mabel's fingers hovered over the notebook. "They said I signed." "Signed what?" Wyatt asked. "To let Juneau go to a recovery property." Her voice was thin, but steadying. "New Hampshire," they said. "Better space, less noise. Good for older dogs." Naomi looked at the form. "Did you sign it?" "I signed one paper months before, not that one." Mabel swallowed. "Not for Juneau." The wood stove popped softly. Outside, snow brushed against the window, light as ash. Wyatt looked at the brochure, then at the collar, then at Mabel's face. He wanted to be careful. He had seen grief turn suspicion into certainty. He had seen lonely people build patterns out of pain because patterns hurt less than emptiness. A person could be frightened and wrong at the same time. But Mabel's fear did not feel shapeless. It had names. "How many dogs?" he asked. Mabel stared at the notebook. "I don't know anymore." The answer stayed in the room. Not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. Naomi folded the transfer copy carefully and placed it back on the table without pretending she had enough to judge. "Mabel, I need you to tell us only what you know, not what you fear, what you know." Mabel nodded. She had taken in dogs for years, she said. Old dogs, abandoned dogs, working dogs with no work left in them. When her knees got bad and her husband died, she could not keep many at once. Northstar Lodge had offered help. They had a program, a clean one on paper, where rescue dogs were rehabilitated, given light winter work if suitable, and supported through guest donations. Some dogs had done well there. Mabel admitted that.
She had seen them healthy in the public yard, wearing bright harnesses, tails high. That was what made the rest harder to say. The older ones disappeared first. Dogs that tired easily. Dogs that did not like crowds.
Dogs with stiff hips or cloudy eyes. When Mabel asked, Northstar sent forms. Transfer notes, recovery destinations, language polished smooth as riverstone. Then Juneau vanished. She was old, Mabel said, but she knew my voice. She knew the back porch. She knew the sound of my wind chime. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. A dog like that does not simply become paperwork. Harlan lifted his head. The collar lay on the table within his reach. He leaned forward and sniffed it once. Wyatt watched him closely. There was no sudden growl, no miraculous sign, no secret command passing through the air. Harlan only drew in the smell of old leather, dog fur, damp storage, and the sour edge of fear that clung to Mabel's hands. Then he lowered his head again beside her and exhaled slowly. Mabel's trembling eased. That small change moved Wyatt more than he wanted it to. He had spent months telling himself he was finished with being needed, finished with doors opening in bad weather, finished with the old instinct that made him stand up when others sat still. But Harlan had not retired from kindness. Maybe that was the trouble with dogs. They did not respect a man's decision to become less human. Naomi packed her bag, but did not leave. "This needs to be handled carefully," she said. "No accusations yet. No marching up to Northstar. No guessing." Wyatt almost smiled. "You think I'm March?" "I think grief makes quiet men do loud things." That landed too close to truth. Mabel looked at him then, really looked at him, and Wyatt saw how tired she was of not being believed. Her face had fine wrinkles around the eyes, the kind left by laughter long before fear moved in. Her hands were thin, the knuckles swollen, a smear of blue ink near one thumb. "I don't need you to fight anyone," she said. "I just need someone to remember with me." Wyatt had no answer. Outside, the light faded from gray to blue. The visitors in town would be returning to inns and rented cabins. Someone would be ordering stew at the diner. Someone would say the snow looked beautiful under the street lamps. At the back of Wyatt's house, a snowmobile passed along the road toward the lake. The sound was brief, mechanical, ordinary. Mabel jerked awake as if struck. Her hand clamped around the edge of the blanket. Her eyes went wide, fixed on the door. Harlan struggled to his feet faster than he should have, pain flashing through his hindquarters. He stepped between Mabel and the back door, head low, shoulders squared, not barking, only standing. Wyatt saw it all in one breath. The old woman's terror, the dog's pain, the collar on the table, the notebook full of names no one had protected. He still had no proof of a crime. He had no right to accuse a lodge that half the town depended on. But there were kinds of fear a man learned to recognize if he had spent enough years finding people who had almost stopped calling for help. Mabel Corcoran was not confused about being afraid. And those names in her notebook were not finished asking to be heard. Wyatt reached for the brass compass on the windowsill and closed his fingers around it, not because he needed direction to walk across his own kitchen, but because he suddenly understood that the quiet life he had built was not peace. It was only a closed door, and outside that door, something loyal had been left in the snow. Morning came to Alder Creek with a clean brightness that made the previous night feel almost unreasonable. Snow rested on the roofs in smooth white layers. The lake road had been plowed once before dawn, leaving high banks on either side like walls of packed sugar. Smoke lifted from chimneys in thin blue lines. Down in town, the bakery had opened early for the visitors who liked to say they had discovered Vermont winter, as if winter had been waiting politely for them to arrive. Wyatt Bramwell drove slowly toward Willow Bend with Mabel Corcoran in the passenger seat and Harlan stretched across the back of the truck cab. Mabel had refused the hospital. Dr. Naomi Klein had not liked it, but she had accepted the decision after checking Mabel twice and making her promise to call if the dizziness returned. Wyatt had insisted on taking her home himself. Mabel had protested once, weakly, then gone quiet, with both hands folded over the blue cloth notebook in her lap. She looked smaller in daylight. Not fragile, exactly. Fragile things broke easily, and Wyatt had the feeling Mabel Corcoran had survived being overlooked for a long time. But she looked worn thin, as if worry had sanded the edges from her. Willow Bend sat at the far end of a narrow road lined with bare maples and old stone walls. Mabel's house was a modest white cottage with green shutters, the paint weathered but clean. A wind chime hung beside the porch, its metal tubes moving softly in the cold breeze. The sound was light, almost shy. Mabel paused when she heard it. "Juneau liked that," she said. Wyatt did not answer. He only came around to help her from the truck. Harlan waited until Mabel had both feet steady on the shoveled path before climbing down. He landed stiffly, his right hip catching for a second, but he refused Wyatt's hand. Pride, in dogs, could be as stubborn as in men. The house did not smell abandoned when Wyatt stepped inside. It smelled of cedar shavings, old wool, weak coffee, and floor soap. Everything had been kept in order. A row of clean bowls sat upside down on a towel near the sink. Leashes hung from hooks by size. Folded blankets filled a low shelf beside the mudroom. On the wall, a faded photograph showed a younger Mabel beside a broad-shouldered man in a plaid shirt, both of them kneeling among 4 dogs of different breeds and ages. "My husband, Amos," she said, seeing Wyatt look. "He built the back kennels before he built me a proper pantry. I told him that said something about his priorities." "Did it?" "It said I married correctly." There was no smile on her face, but the memory warmed her voice. Behind the cottage, a small barn stood half buried in snow. Its doors were closed, the roof patched in 2 places, the walkway cleared with more effort than Mabel should have been spending. Wyatt followed her through the back room and out to the covered porch. The yard beyond was not sad because it was neglected. It was sad because it had been waiting carefully. 3 empty outdoor runs stood along the fence, each covered against the snow. A water bucket sat upside down on a crate. A blue rubber ball lay beneath a bench, half hidden under frost. Strips of old blankets had been hung over the gates to keep wind from cutting through. Harlan walked to the first run and lowered his head. Mabel watched him from the porch. "I used to tell myself empty kennels meant success. A dog moved on. A dog found a home. A dog didn't need me anymore." Wyatt looked at the clean straw stacked under a tarp. "And now? Now I don't trust empty." She said it without drama. That made it worse. Inside, Mabel made tea because she needed something to do with her hands. Wyatt did not want tea, but he took a mug. Men who had spent their lives in remote stations learned not to refuse what steadied a shaken person. Mabel opened the notebook on the kitchen table. In daylight, the book seemed less like evidence and more like a life's work. The handwriting changed over the years. Earlier pages had lively loops and little jokes in the margins. Later pages were smaller, tighter, more economical, but no less careful. Juneau, female, old, black and white mix, hates metal doors, sleeps better near cedar, knows the porch chime. Otis, male, hunting hound, left hip stiff, loyal to Calvin Rusk, likes winter sun through south window. Birch, male, pale shepherd mix, eats only if someone sits nearby, watches hands closely. Lottie, Female, brown, flinches at raised voices, gentle with older dogs. King, male, large, nose latches, not disobedient, just clever. Wyatt read more than he meant to. He had read incident reports, weather maps, burn patterns, missing person timelines. He had learned to value details because details were how the lost returned. But these notes were different. They did not reduce a life into useful facts. They preserved the small things no official form ever asked for. A dog that liked winter sun. A dog that feared raised voices. A dog that needed someone nearby before he could eat. Wyatt pushed the notebook back gently. You wrote all this? For every dog? For the ones I could. Mabel ran one finger along the edge of a page. If they came to me nameless, I waited. Sometimes a name was already inside them. You only had to watch long enough. Harlan lay near the back door, eyes half closed but ears listening. Mabel reached into the cloth bag and began explaining each item with the care of someone afraid one wrong word would make all of it disappear. The collar marked Juneau had not come from Northstar. It was Juneau's old collar, the one Mabel had removed before the dog was transferred because the leather had cracked and she wanted to mend it. The cut straps had been found months later near the rear fence at Northstar when Mabel went to ask why two dogs no longer appeared in the public yard. She had not trespassed, she said quickly. She had stood outside the service entrance until someone told her to leave. The transfer form was a copy Northstar had mailed her after she asked about Juneau. It looked official, Mabel said. That is the trouble with paper. It behaves better than people. Wyatt glanced at the signature line. Mabel Corcoran. The letters slanted wrong. He did not say it yet. Suspicion was not proof. He had learned that the hard way in other people's tragedies. Still, the wrongness stayed under his skin. By late morning, Wyatt drove into town with the transfer copy in a folder on the passenger seat. He left Mabel with strict instructions from Naomi and a promise that he would return to fix the loose rear latch before evening. Harlan stayed with him, head lifted now and then whenever the truck passed a snowmobile trailer or the distant bark of a dog. The sheriff's office sat beside the town hall, a low brick building with a flag stiff in the cold. Inside, the heat was too high and the coffee smelled punished. Sheriff Elias Mercer looked up from behind a desk crowded with papers, a radio, and a mug that read, World's Okayest Sheriff. Elias was 61, broad through the shoulders but softened by age and office work. His short hair had gone mostly gray-brown, and a neat silver mustache gave his tired face a gentleness that did not quite hide the weight behind his eyes. He and Wyatt had known each other in the old way of rural men who had shared bad weather, search grids, and long drives without needing friendship to be loud. Wyatt, Elias said, if this is about the plow berm at your drive, I already told Gus to stop burying your mailbox. It's not the mailbox. Elias leaned back slowly. Wyatt placed the folder on the desk. He did not make speeches. He told Elias what had happened. Mabel in the snow, the notebook, the collar, the transfer form, the cut straps, Northstar's name. He kept his voice even. Elias listened without interruption, which Wyatt appreciated. Some men only waited for their turn to dismiss what made them uncomfortable. When Wyatt finished, Elias opened the folder. His expression did not change much, but his thumb paused over the signature. You talked to Graham Voss? Elias asked. No. Good. Wyatt's jaw tightened. That sounded like a warning. It was. Elias stood and crossed to the window. Outside, a plow moved down Main Street, spraying dirty snow against the curb. Tourists stepped around it laughing, their cheeks red from cold and vacation. Northstar is not a shed in the woods, Elias said. It's the largest winter employer this town has left. Rooms, rentals, drivers, food orders, taxes, donations. Half the storefronts down there breathe easier when Northstar's parking lot is full. That doesn't make them clean. No. Elias turned back. But it means if we move on feeling instead of evidence, Graham Voss will have 3 attorneys here before lunch, and by supper, Mabel will be the confused widow who mislaid a dog, and you'll be the grieving old ranger looking for purpose. The words struck harder because they were not cruel. They were possible. Wyatt looked at him. You believe her? Elias took too long to answer. I believe she is scared, he said. I believe something may be wrong. I also believe I have seen a true accusation die because the first steps were sloppy. There it was. Wyatt remembered the case. Years ago, before he retired, a local kennel owner had been accused of neglect. Elias had acted fast, too fast. The photos had been taken wrong, a witness changed his story, the warrant got challenged, and the whole thing collapsed under procedure. The county paid. The kennel owner turned himself into a martyr. The animals involved vanished into legal fog. Elias had carried that failure ever since. I'm not asking you to kick indoors, Wyatt said. Good, because I won't. But I am asking you not to bury it, because Northstar buys banners for the Winter Festival. Elias's eyes hardened for the first time. Careful. Wyatt held his gaze. That's what everyone keeps telling me. For a moment, they were not old acquaintances. They were 2 men standing on opposite sides of the same fear. One afraid of doing too little, the other afraid of doing it wrong. Elias opened a drawer and took out a card. Deputy Lorna Pike, he said. County level. Handles animal transport issues when they cross lines or paperwork gets creative. She is not warm. She is not impressed by retired rangers, and she will not let you play detective. Wyatt took the card. Sounds perfect. She'll say the same thing I'm saying. No trespassing, no taking documents, no confronting Northstar. If there's a case, we build it so it stands. Wyatt slipped the card into his coat pocket. At the door, Elias added, quieter, Wyatt? He turned. If Mabel is right, we do this carefully for her sake too. People like Graham don't just defend themselves. They choose who to make small. Wyatt thought of Mabel in the ditch, clutching the cloth bag as if it held the last proof she had not imagined love. I know, he said. By afternoon, Naomi called him to the clinic. Her practice stood behind a row of wind-bent cedars, a square building painted white with green trim. Inside, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic, wet dog, old wood, and the faint burnt edge of overworked coffee. A terrier in a cone glared at Wyatt as if he had personally caused the insult. Naomi met him in the exam room with a file in hand. I pulled what I could without violating client records, she said. General notes, dates, my own treatment logs. She looked more tired than she had the night before. Her dark hair was tied low, sleeves pushed up, a yellow microchip scanner clipped to the side of her bag. Practicality seemed to follow her like a second coat. Northstar funded your heated kennel units, Wyatt said. Naomi's mouth tightened. A portion of them. 2 winters ago. I wasn't accusing. I am. She tapped the file against her palm. At myself, mostly. She laid out what she could say. A few dogs from Northstar had come in over the past year with exhaustion, dehydration, raw collar marks, paw injuries that did not match the cheerful language of light recreational work. Nothing alone had been enough. Rescue dogs often arrived with histories. Winter work was hard. Northstar always had explanations, and sometimes those explanations were plausible. That's how rot survives, Naomi said. Not by looking rotten every day. She would not make a conclusion yet. She was clear about that. But from now on, she would document everything separately. If Northstar sent another animal in, she would photograph, measure, record, and keep copies. And if her prior connection to Northstar became a problem, she would disclose it before anyone used it to discredit her. Wyatt nodded. That may cost you. It already has. She looked through the exam room window toward the kennels. I just don't know the total yet. On his way back to Willow Bend, Wyatt stopped at the hardware store for screws, a stronger latch, and a length of weatherproofing strip. The clerk asked if he was fixing storm damage. Wyatt said yes, because it was easier than explaining that sometimes a loose door latch became part of whether an old woman could sleep. Mabel was sitting at the kitchen table when he returned, the notebook open, a pen in her hand. Harlan went straight to the back porch instead of the stove. Wyatt followed him outside with the toolbox. The empty kennels looked different in the falling light. Less like absence now, more like witnesses waiting their turn. Wyatt worked on the latch while Mabel stood wrapped in a cardigan at the back door. She did not hover. She only watched the yard, as if afraid to take her eyes off it too long. Amos built those runs after a beagle named Ruthie chewed through our pantry door, she said. Wyatt tightened a screw. Did Ruthie regret it? She regretted being caught. Harlan lay in the snow near the first kennel, his black and gold coat bright against the white. He faced the empty gates, not alert exactly, but attentive. Wind moved through the covered runs and lifted one loose strip of blanket. Mabel's voice softened. People think old dogs ask for less. Wyatt looked back at her. They don't, she said. They ask quieter. The screw stopped turning under Wyatt's hand. That was the sentence that stayed with him. Not because it accused him, because it included him. Old grief asked quieter too. Old guilt, old love, old duty. A man could mistake quiet for absence if he wanted to badly enough. He finished the latch and tested it twice. Solid. Not perfect. Better than before. When he stood, his knees complained. Harlan lifted his head but did not get up. Wyatt let him rest. I spoke to Elias, he said. Mabel's shoulders tightened. He didn't dismiss it, Wyatt added. But he needs proof that can stand. He's bringing in a deputy from the county, Lorna Pike. Mabel nodded slowly, though her face held the familiar exhaustion of someone being asked, once again, to wait while official people decided whether pain had filled out the right forms. Wyatt understood that exhaustion. He also understood Elias. That made the day heavier. I don't know what this is yet, Wyatt said. I won't pretend I do. Mabel looked past him at the kennels. I only know they had names. Snow began again, light and fine, softening the edges of the yard. Wyatt closed the toolbox. For most of his life, he had believed rescue began with urgency. A flare, a shout, a missing person report, blood on snow, a radio call before dawn. Now, standing beside a repaired latch and 3 empty dog runs, he wondered if some rescues began much earlier. With a woman writing names no one else thought mattered. With a veterinarian deciding not to look away from old notes. With a sheriff afraid of making the same mistake twice. With a dog lying in the snow, facing empty kennels as if guarding the space where the lost might return. Wyatt looked at Harlan, then at Mabel's blue notebook on the kitchen table behind her. The story had not opened like a crime. It had opened like neglect. And neglect, Wyatt knew, was often harder to prove because it rarely slammed a door. It simply left one closed. Northstar Lodge looked like the kind of place people wanted winter to be. It sat above Alder Creek on a gentle rise, its red timber buildings arranged around a wide courtyard brushed clean of snow. Golden lights hung beneath the eaves, smoke lifted from stone chimneys in soft, confident ribbons. Beyond the main lodge, pine trees stood white along the slopes, and the mountains rose behind them with the calm arrogance of things too old to apologize. Wyatt Bramwell parked at the edge of the visitor lot and sat for a moment before getting out. Harlan stood behind him in the truck bed, looking over the side rail with his ears forward. Wyatt had laid down a rubber mat so the old shepherd would not slip, and he had brought the portable ramp because Harlan's right hip had been worse that morning. "We look like tourists," Wyatt muttered. Harlan blinked at him, unimpressed. Wyatt had called Elias before leaving. He had also spoken to Deputy Lorna Pike by phone for the first time. Lorna's voice had been low, clipped, and absolutely unwilling to be charmed. "You may visit the public area," she had said. "You may ask ordinary questions. You may observe. You may not enter staff-only areas, take documents, open gates, follow employees, or decide that your past career gives you magical jurisdiction." "I was a ranger, not a wizard," Wyatt had said. "That remains to be seen." He had almost liked her then. Now, standing beneath the tasteful wooden sign that read, "Northstar Lodge, Rescue Dogs, Second Chances," Wyatt was grateful for the warning. The place did not feel criminal. That was the first thing that unsettled him. It felt clean. A group of retired visitors stood near an outdoor fire pit, cupping hot cider in gloved hands. Two women in matching white parkas posed for a photograph beside a wooden sled decorated with pine boughs. A man with silver hair and expensive boots laughed as a friendly Malamute leaned against his knee for attention. No children ran through the courtyard. The guests were grown people with winter hobbies, good cameras, and enough money to call discomfort rustic. The dogs in the public yard looked healthy. That mattered. Wyatt watched them before he watched the people. A team of huskies and shepherd mixes rested in straw-filled boxes near the sled trail. Their coats were brushed, their harnesses fitted well, their water bowls clear of ice. One black and white dog rolled onto its back while a staff member scratched its belly. Another barked twice at a passing guest, not in fear, but in bored demand for attention. If this was cruelty, it had learned to wear a very good coat. A young staffer directed Wyatt toward the demonstration area. Wyatt moved slowly for Harlan's sake. The shepherd came down the ramp, landed stiffly, and stood for a second while the ache settled. Wyatt pretended not to notice too much. Harlan pretended not to need the courtesy. Near the public kennel fence, a woman was checking paw pads on a lean brown sled dog. She wore a burgundy fleece jacket with the Northstar logo, black work pants, and rubber boots lined with wool. Her blonde hair was tied low, and her hands were red and cracked from cold water and constant work. She looked up when Harlan stopped beside the fence. "Handsome old man?" she said. Wyatt glanced at Harlan. "He'll accept handsome, not old." The woman gave a small smile. "Most of them don't." Her name tag read Tessa. Wyatt rested one hand on the fence rail. "You work with all of them?" "Most days." She went back to checking the dog's paw, her thumb gentle, practiced. "Depends on who's assigned to trail, who's resting, who's pretending a limp because they don't like the weather." The dog under her hand wagged as if accused unfairly. Wyatt looked at the rows of well-kept boxes, the fresh straw, the visible records clipped near the gate. "Looks organized." "It has to be." Guests notice everything until something matters. The words came out before she seemed to approve them. Her mouth tightened. Wyatt did not pounce. He had learned over years in the woods that sudden movement made frightened creatures bolt. People were no different. "I had a neighbor who used to foster dogs," he said. "Mabel Corcoran." Tessa's hand paused on the dog's paw, only for a second. "She did good work," Tessa said. "Still does, in her way." Tessa looked across the yard toward the lodge, her expression closed carefully, like a door being latched without sound. "Is she doing okay?" She had a fall yesterday. Something in Tessa's face flickered. Concern, then fear, then obedience to some inner rule. I'm sorry to hear that. Wyatt kept his voice ordinary. She asked about a few dogs. Juneau, Otis, Birch. The brown dog under Tessa's hand pulled its paw back. Tessa let it go. Before she could answer, a man's voice came from behind Wyatt. "Mr. Bramwell, isn't it?" Wyatt turned. Graham Voss crossed the courtyard with a warmth that seemed professionally measured. He was 52, tall, trim, and dressed in a charcoal wool coat that had no business looking that clean around working dogs. Silver touched both temples of his dark hair. His smile was easy, and his eyes carried the cool blue shine of frozen water under sun. He extended a gloved hand. "Graham Voss," he said. "Welcome to Northstar." Wyatt shook his hand. The grip was firm, but not challenging. A practiced grip. One that had met donors, officials, unhappy guests, and people who needed to feel respected quickly. "Wyatt Bramwell." "I know. Former federal ranger. Alder Creek is lucky to have you back." That was too smooth to be accidental. Wyatt released his hand. "Not sure Alder Creek agrees?" Graham smiled as if that too had been useful. Small towns rarely agree with themselves. That's part of their charm. Harlan stood beside Wyatt, silent. Graham glanced down at him with polite appreciation. "Beautiful shepherd," he said. "Retired working dog?" "Search support, woods and weather." "Then he understands service." Graham's gaze moved toward the public yard. "That is what we try to honor here. Dogs that were unwanted, too old for someone's patience, too energetic for someone's apartment, too costly for someone's budget. We give them structure, care, movement, purpose, and in return they help keep this town alive through the winter." It was a fine speech because parts of it were true. Wyatt disliked that. He had expected slickness. He had not expected the public yards to be clean, the visible dogs to be well treated, the staff to know what they were doing. He had not expected Tessa's hands to be gentle. He had not expected Graham Voss to sound like a man who could persuade decent people because he understood exactly which pieces of decency to display. "That's a lot to carry on dogs," Wyatt said. Graham's smile did not fade. "It's a partnership, not exploitation. Some dogs don't suit this kind of work." "Of course," Graham nodded. "We assess carefully. Some remain companions. Some transfer to quieter recovery properties. Some are placed privately with retired owners. We do not force what an animal cannot give." The words were perfect. Wyatt thought of Mabel's notebook. Juneau, hates metal doors. Otis, left hip stiff. Birch, eats only if someone sits nearby. "What about Juneau?" he asked. "Mabel mentioned her." The first sign of change in Graham was so slight Wyatt might have missed it years ago, before he learned to read the moment a person realized a trail had bent in an inconvenient direction. Not alarm, adjustment. "Juneau," Graham repeated. "Older female, yes. She was not suited to public work. Sweet animal, but anxious." "Where is she now?" "Transferred to a recovery partner in New Hampshire." Graham looked toward the office. "We keep records." "I'd be happy to have my admin prepare a copy for Mrs. Corcoran if she misplaced hers." "She has one." "Good." Graham's tone softened in the way people softened when preparing to dismiss the elderly kindly. "Mabel has a large heart. Sometimes that makes letting go difficult." Tessa had gone very still near the fence. Harlan shifted his weight, and Wyatt felt the dog's shoulder brush his leg. Not a warning, not a sign, just presence. Graham continued, "We have saved dozens of animals from worse outcomes. Not every story ends with a perfect postcard. Some dogs arrive already carrying damage. We do what we can within reality."
There it was, clean as a knife laid on a napkin. Reality. A word people used when they wanted compassion to sit down and stop making trouble. Wyatt looked around the bright courtyard, at the guests smiling over cider, at the healthy dogs in clean straw.
At the donation plaque near the office, thanking Northstar for supporting the winter festival, the senior shuttle, the clinic kennel heaters, nothing here looked hidden. Everything here looked designed to be seen. And that was the thought that hooked under his ribs. If a place knew exactly how to be seen, what had it learned to keep out of sight? A gust of wind moved through the pines behind the lodge. Harlan's head turned. Not toward the kennels, not toward the trail where the sled team waited, toward the dark stand of trees beyond a side building, where a narrow service path disappeared between snowbanks. A small sign hung from a rope across the entrance. Staff only. Graham noticed Wyatt notice. Maintenance access, he said easily. Storage, trail equipment, compost, the unromantic side of hospitality. Every place has one, Wyatt said. Indeed. A staff member called Graham from the lodge steps. A guest had a question about a private evening ride. Graham excused himself with smooth regret. If you need anything, Mr. Bramwell, ask for me. We value transparency. Wyatt watched him walk away. Tessa resumed moving only after Graham was out of earshot. She clipped the gate latch, then picked up a bucket that did not need picking up. Juneau was anxious, Wyatt said quietly. Tessa did not look at him. A lot of rescues are. Otis? Her jaw tightened. Old hound, sweet, bad hip. Birch? This time she looked at Harlan, not Wyatt. He wouldn't eat alone. The confirmation was small, too small for court, too large for Wyatt to ignore. Are they in New Hampshire? Wyatt asked. Tessa gripped the bucket handle until her knuckles paled. I have dogs to feed, she said. Then she walked away. Wyatt did not follow. He stayed where visitors were allowed. He let Harlan rest near the fence. He watched two teams run a short demonstration loop, watched guests applaud, watched a gray-muzzled shepherd mix press happily into a handler's legs after finishing. Good care existed here. That was the uncomfortable truth. Cruel systems often survived by containing enough goodness to confuse the people inside them. By the time Wyatt left Northstar, the afternoon light had turned gold on the snow. Graham stood on the lodge steps, speaking with a couple in matching parkas. Tessa was nowhere visible. The staff-only path remained roped off, shadows gathering beneath the pines behind it. Wyatt helped Harlan into the truck. You're not proof, he told the dog. Harlan settled heavily onto the mat. But you do have opinions. Harlan closed his eyes. Instead of driving straight home, Wyatt stopped at Marnie's Diner on Main Street. He needed coffee that tasted like something had gone wrong with it. He also needed to sit somewhere people talked without thinking they were talking. The diner was warm, crowded with adults avoiding the cold, rental shop owners, visiting photographers, a few retirees with maps spread across a table. Wyatt took a stool near the end of the counter. Orville Keene sat 2 stools down, wearing a brown canvas coat that looked older than several town ordinances. He was 73, long-faced, thin as a fence rail, with a white beard that grew in uneven patches and eyes permanently narrowed from staring across ice. A dented green tackle tin sat on the counter beside his coffee. "You're on the wrong side of the lake," Orville said without greeting. "Good to see you too." "Didn't say it was good." Wyatt accepted coffee from Marnie and let silence do its work. Orville stirred his cup, though he had not added sugar. "Saw tracks near the old boathouse again." Wyatt looked at him. "Coyote?" "Coyote don't step like that." Orville sipped. "Dog, maybe. Big enough. Keeps to the back pilings. I leave scraps when I have extra. You see it?
No, just tracks. Once a shadow. He tapped the tackle tin. Ghost dog, maybe. Marnie, passing with plates, said, "Orville thinks everything by the lake is either a ghost or tax fraud." "Usually one or the other," Orville said. The diner laughed lightly, then moved on. Wyatt did not laugh. A dog near the old boathouse meant little. Alder Creek had strays sometimes. Farm dogs wandered. Tourists lost pets and blamed the landscape. Still, Orville's words settled in him beside the image of the staff-only path and Tessa's pale knuckles. He finished his coffee and drove home at dusk. For an hour he did chores badly. Stacked wood he did not need stacked. Checked the porch ramp. Fed Harlan. Looked at the phone twice, thinking of Lorna Pike. Then decided he had nothing solid enough to add beyond impressions. Impressions could poison a case if poured too early. By night, the moon had risen over the snow, bright enough to turn the yard blue. Wyatt put on his parka, clipped a reflective lead to Harlan's collar, and called Lorna.
"I'm walking the public trail along the Northstar boundary," he said when she answered. A pause. "You're informing me or asking permission?" "Informing you before you tell me later I should have." "That almost resembles wisdom." Papers shifted on her end. "Do not cross posted lines. Do not touch anything on their property. If you observe something from public access, photograph location, not drama. Call me before you decide weather makes you special." "Understood." "Mr. Bramwell?" "Yes?" "Your dog is not probable cause." Wyatt looked at Harlan, who was waiting by the door with the patience of a saint and the hips of an old carpenter. He'll be disappointed. The public trail ran behind the lower edge of Northstar's property, an old winter path once used by skiers and maintenance crews before the lodge expanded. Wyatt knew it from his ranger days. Snow squeaked under his boots. The air smelled of pine resin, frozen earth, and distant wood smoke. Harlan moved slowly, but with purpose. Wyatt kept the lead loose. He was careful not to pretend the dog was tracking. They were walking, observing, nothing more. Northstar glowed above them through the trees. From this angle, the lodge looked even more beautiful, all warm windows and soft music drifting faintly from outdoor speakers. Laughter carried across the snow, thinned by distance until it sounded unreal. Then came another sound, low, broken, a kind of breath pulled through pain. Harlan stopped. Wyatt stopped with him. The sound came again from beyond the boundary fence, somewhere down the slope toward the service side. Not a bark, not a howl. A muffled, strained cry, quickly swallowed. Wyatt's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. He lifted his flashlight, but kept the beam low. The fence line ran a few yards ahead, marked with private property signs. On Wyatt's side of it, near a clump of frozen grass, something dark lay half buried in snow. He did not cross the fence. He moved closer on the public side and crouched. A strip of torn blanket, stiff with ice. A smear darkened one edge, not fresh red, dried brown. Beside it, partly pressed into the snow, were drag marks leading toward the fence and a short length of worn collar strap, cut at one end. Wyatt took out his phone. Photograph wide first. Trail marker visible. Fence visible. Lodge lights in the distance. Then closer. The blanket. The strap. The drag marks. His boot stayed back from the impressions. Harlan stood behind him, breathing slow, eyes fixed beyond the wire. The cry did not come again. Wyatt called Lorna. She answered on the second ring. "You crossed?" "No." "You touched?" "No." "What do you have?" "Maybe nothing," Wyatt said, looking through the fence at the dark trees below Northstar's polished lights. "Maybe the first thing that doesn't know how to smile for guests." He He sent the photos while he stood there in the moonlit snow. Above him, Northstar Lodge shone warm and golden against the winter night. Guests laughed near the fire pits. Dogs in the public yard slept on clean straw. The sign at the entrance promised rescue, second chances, and kindness arranged beautifully enough to sell. Wyatt looked down at the torn blanket by the fence. He had spent his life learning that danger did not always announce itself with smoke or shouting. Sometimes it stood in a well-lit place, shook your hand, and spoke gently about doing good. And sometimes the only honest thing in all that brightness was a scrap of dirty cloth, half buried in the snow. Deputy Lorna Pike did not build a case out of feelings. That was the first thing Wyatt Bramwell learned about her. She arrived at Naomi Klein's clinic before sunrise with a county vehicle crusted in road salt, a thermos in one hand, and a burnt orange waterproof notebook tucked under her arm. She was not tall enough to intimidate by size, but she had the stillness of a woman who had learned to make carelessness uncomfortable. Her dark hair, threaded with gray, was tucked behind both ears. Her eyes moved once around the room and seemed to file everything away. Mabel's photocopied transfer form, Naomi's medical notes, Wyatt's phone, the photographs from the trail, Harlan sleeping stiffly beside the door. "I want the order of discovery again," she said. Not unkindly, not warmly either. Wyatt told it again. The public trail, the fence line, the torn blanket on his side of the boundary, the cut strap, the sound from beyond the property, the photographs taken wide before close. No crossing. No touching. Lorna wrote only after he finished. "Good." Wyatt almost laughed. "That sounded painful for you." It was. Naomi stood at the exam table with a thin folder open in front of her. Her hair was tied back, and her face had the tired focus of someone who had slept badly because her conscience kept asking follow-up questions. "This alone will not get you inside Maple Cut," she said. "No," Lorna agreed. "But this plus Mrs. Corcoran's statement, the transfer irregularity, your treatment concerns, and the animal found near the lower boundary might." Wyatt looked at her. "What animal?" Naomi's expression tightened. "In the back kennel," she said. "An older husky mix, male, found by a plow driver near the service road below Maple Cut at 4:30 this morning. Hypothermic, dehydrated, collar abrasion, raw patches on the chest. No visible trauma that screams one clean story, but enough to say he was exposed too long and restrained badly." Lorna flipped a page in her notebook. "Microchip links him to a transfer intake routed through Northstar." The room changed. Not dramatically. No one spoke at once. No one slammed a hand on the table. But the suspicion that had been floating for days finally found weight. Naomi led them to the kennel. The husky mix lay on a heated pad beneath a gray blanket, his coat dull and clumped with old ice melt. His face had the white mask of age, and one eye was cloudy. When the kennel door opened, he did not lift his head. He only tracked them with exhausted caution. Harlan rose from the hallway before Wyatt told him to stay. "Harlan?" Wyatt said quietly. The shepherd stopped. His ears leaned forward, but he did not push closer. Naomi knelt by the husky mix and checked the blanket edge. "I scanned twice. Chip number matches a dog named Marrow in a regional rescue transfer list. The last recorded placement went through a Northstar-affiliated intake program." "Is he stable?" Lorna asked. "Stable enough to survive the morning if nobody decides to prove a point with him." "That is not my plan." "I know. I was saying it for the room." Wyatt looked at Marrow's neck. The fur had been rubbed thin in a narrow line where a collar or strap had sat too tight for too long. He had seen rope burns on wildlife caught in illegal snares. He had seen hikers cut by their own pack straps after falls. The body remembered pressure even when the object was gone. Marrow closed his eyes. Not trust, only exhaustion. That hurt in a way Wyatt did not have a name for. By 9, Lorna had enough to seek a limited animal welfare check and administrative inspection for the Maple Cut holding area. Not a raid, not a dramatic accusation, a narrow, lawful entry based on an animal found near the boundary, documented medical concerns, transfer inconsistencies, and possible welfare risk in freezing conditions. Elias Mercer signed on after reading the packet twice. He did it in his office, with the door closed and Wyatt standing by the wall. The sheriff's face looked older in the fluorescent light. He held the papers for a moment longer than necessary, then set them down and picked up his pen. "Last time I moved too fast," Elias said. Wyatt said nothing. "This time I'm afraid I'm moving too slow." Lorna, standing beside the desk, answered before Wyatt could. "Then move correctly." Elias looked at her. She did not soften it. "That is the only speed that helps them," she said. The pen scratched across the page. Maple Cut lay below the polished side of Northstar, down a service track that dipped through a grove of bare maples and hemlocks. Wyatt rode with Lorna because she wanted him close enough to point out the safe approach, and far enough from decision-making to remember he was not in charge. Elias followed in his sheriff's SUV. Naomi came behind with an animal control van and a county officer named Ben Trask, a broad, quiet man whose beard had frozen at the edges by the time they reached the lower road. Harlan came, but only because Wyatt had argued less than he wanted to. Naomi had made the terms clear. Harlan could stay outside the inspection zone. No deep snow, no pushing into kennels, no heroics. "He is 8 years old with a bad hip," she had said. "Do not make him pay for your conscience." Wyatt had not liked hearing that. He had needed to. A quarter-mile before Maple Cut, Lorna stopped the convoy near a pullout. Tessa Rowe stood there beneath a snow-heavy spruce, wearing a plain brown canvas coat with no Northstar logo. She looked smaller without the burgundy fleece, less like staff and more like a person who had not slept. Her hands were bare despite the cold. Lorna noticed. "Gloves?" Tessa looked down as if surprised by her own fingers. "Forgot." Wyatt took an extra pair from his coat pocket and held them out. She hesitated before accepting. "I'm not stealing anything," Tessa said quickly. "I didn't bring documents. I didn't touch the office." "Good," Lorna said. "Tell me only what you know firsthand." Tessa swallowed. "There is a lower holding shed. They call it recovery overflow. Some dogs stay there before transfer. Not the ones guests see. The ones that don't photograph well, don't pull clean, don't settle around crowds. Who makes transfer decisions? Graham signs off. Sometimes management uses codes instead of names. I entered feeding notes. I didn't always see final destinations. Did you falsify records? The question was flat enough to be merciful. Tessa's eyes filled, but did not spill over. I signed some I should not have signed. I told myself if I stayed, I could at least feed them better, change wet blankets, slip extra broth into bowls. Her voice broke on the last word. That does not make it right, she said. No, Lorna replied. It makes it part of your statement. Tessa looked past them toward the hidden road. My mother was a nurse. She saw my coat once after a shift and asked me if I was caring for dogs or guarding a jail. No one answered. There was nothing useful to say to a truth that had already done its work. Lorna recorded the time, the location, and Tessa's statement. Then she told her to remain with Ben until called. Not because she was under arrest, because loose emotion near frightened animals could become another kind of harm. The service track opened into Maple Cut just before noon. For one strange moment, the place was beautiful. The valley held the snow gently, like a bowl of white glass.
Bare maples rose in pale columns. Sunlight slipped between clouds and lit the ice along the shed roofs so they flashed like polished metal. A person standing far enough away could have painted the scene and called it peaceful.
Then the wind shifted. The smell came first. Wet straw, old urine, cheap disinfectant, cold metal, and dog fear. The main holding shed was long and low, with gray siding and a sliding door half frozen at the track. A Northstar sign hung beside it, small and official-looking. Recovery Annex, staff access only. Graham Voss had learned to name things carefully. Lorna read the inspection authorization aloud while Elias stood beside her. Naomi filmed the door, the sign, the exterior, the temperature reading on her handheld gauge. Then cut through ice near the track with a shovel before opening anything. No one rushed. That slow correctness made the scene feel more serious, not less. Inside, the light was poor. Rows of temporary kennel runs lined one wall. Some were empty, some were not. The dogs did not erupt into wild barking as Wyatt had expected. A few lifted their heads. One whined and retreated. Another stood with a stiff, defensive posture, its tail tucked so tightly it seemed part of the body. A large black dog struck the gate once with both paws, then froze when the metal rang. Naomi drew in a breath. "Document before handling," Lorna said. "I know. I'm saying it for all of us." Naomi nodded. They moved run by run. Photograph the kennel, record the number, check water, check bedding, scan microchip if safe, note body condition, note visible injuries, do not reach quickly, do not crowd, do not promise what cannot yet be done. Wyatt stayed back with Harlan near the open doorway where the air moved. His job was to point out an old drainage dip behind the shed and warn them which side of the slope could ice over if vehicles turned badly. Useful information, limited information. It was harder than he expected not to step forward. A tan dog in the third run shook so violently the chain on the gate trembled. A shepherd mix kept turning in a circle, not fast, just endlessly, as if the body had chosen repetition because thought was too much. One gray-muzzled hound lay with his head against an empty bowl and watched Naomi's hands like hands had become weather. Sometimes gentle, sometimes not, always beyond the dog's control. The large black dog hit the metal gate again. The sound cracked through the shed. The tan dog yelped. The circling dog spun faster. Naomi stilled her hands. Harlan pushed himself upright beside Wyatt. "No," Wyatt murmured. The shepherd did not move toward the run. He stepped only to the edge of his lead, then lowered himself slowly to the concrete just inside the doorway. The movement was careful because of his hip, but also deliberate. He placed his head low between his paws. He did not stare at the black dog. He did not challenge. He simply breathed. Once, twice, slow. The black dog's paws slipped from the gate. Its chest still heaved. Its eyes stayed white at the edges. But it stopped striking the metal. Naomi looked over her shoulder. For the first time that day, her professional expression cracked into something almost sorrowful. "He knows how to make himself small," she said. Wyatt looked at Harlan, old and aching on the cold floor, offering calm because that was what he still had left to give. Maybe strength was not always the body moving forward. Maybe sometimes it was the body choosing not to frighten what had already been hurt. In a side room, Lorna found the file cabinet. It was not hidden. That was almost worse. It stood beside stacked feed bags and a broken space heater, gray, dented, labeled with masking tape. Annex rotation, transfer hold, cost review. Lorna photographed the cabinet before opening it. Elias stood close enough to witness. Wyatt remained at the doorway until Lorna called Naomi over. The first folders were ordinary enough to bore a guilty conscience into confidence.
feeding charts, exercise limits.
Medication lists, some incomplete. Transfer request forms. Then Lorna pulled a clipboard from the back and went very still. "What is it?" Elias asked. She did not answer immediately. She set it on a crate and photographed the top page. Wyatt saw columns, not names. Codes. A-17, B-04, JN-3, OT-9. Beside the codes were categories written in careful abbreviations: public handling, sled suitability, visual appeal, food cost, medication cost, donation value, resale potential, removal recommendation. Removal. The word was not shouted. It did not need to be. Naomi's mouth tightened until her lips lost color. They scored them. Lorna turned one page with a gloved finger. They costed them. Elias looked as if someone had struck him in a place a bruise would not show. Wyatt thought of Mabel's notebook. Juneau hates metal doors. Otis likes winter sun. Birch eats only if someone sits nearby. Here, the same lives had been flattened into columns. A dog could be anxious, old, loyal, frightened, clever, hungry, patient, grieving. Or a dog could be OT9 with declining public value. The cruelty of it did not smell like blood. It smelled like paper. The sliding door opened behind them. Graham Voss stood in the rectangle of winter light wearing a black parka and leather gloves, his expression concerned but not surprised enough. "Sheriff Mercer," he said. "Deputy, Dr. Klein, I would have appreciated notice before you alarmed recovering animals." Lorna closed the folder without moving it from its documented position. "Mr. Voss, this is a limited welfare inspection under county authorization." "So I see." Graham's gaze traveled over the room, the dogs, Tessa waiting outside by the vehicle, Wyatt near the doorway, Harlan on the floor. He missed very little and revealed less. Maple Cut houses dogs unsuitable for the public yard, elderly rescues, medical holds, behavioral recovery. It is not pretty work, but it is necessary. Naomi stepped forward. "Some of these dogs need immediate medical care." "Then send me your recommendations. We have procedures." "You have frozen water bowls." Graham's face softened, and somehow that made Wyatt angrier than if he had sneered. "Dr. Klein, you know as well as I do that rescue animals arrive with complex histories. We manage limited resources in a difficult climate. Northstar has saved more dogs than most people in this county have ever fed." Elias said, "We are documenting conditions." "Of course." Graham turned to him. "And I trust you will also document how many jobs Northstar supports, how many winter rooms we fill, how many donations we've made to your emergency fund, your senior shuttle, the clinic heaters, the church pantry." The shed was quiet except for the dogs breathing. Graham did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He only laid the town on the floor between them like a living thing. "If this becomes a public misunderstanding," he said, "people will suffer. Not just me, not just Northstar. People who cannot afford a moral performance." Elias's jaw flexed. Wyatt watched the sheriff and saw the old fear in him. Not cowardice, not corruption, but the terror of doing harm while trying to stop it. Then the black dog near the gate whined softly. Not loud, not dramatic. Enough. Elias looked toward the run. Something in his face shifted. "We'll start with the dogs in medical risk," he said. "Naomi?" Naomi was already moving. The next hour became work. Not rescue in the grand way stories liked to tell it. Work. Slow, careful, documented work. Naomi identified 3 dogs who needed immediate removal: the gray hound with dehydration, a shepherd mix with infected paw wounds, and the tan dog whose body temperature had dropped too low. Ben prepared crates. Lorna recorded each movement. Elias signed the temporary release. Graham objected in polished language, and Lorna noted every objection without giving it room to become command. Wyatt helped only where asked. He carried a blanket. He held a flashlight. He guided Ben around the drainage dip so the van would not slide when turning. Harlan stayed down until Wyatt helped him up. By the time the vans pulled away with the most urgent dogs, the sun had dropped behind the maples. Lorna sealed copies of the cost review sheets and several transfer-related documents under the limited scope. The rest would require more authority. She made that clear. No one left satisfied. That, Wyatt thought, was probably how truth began when it had been starved for a long time. At home, dusk had settled blue over the cabin. Wyatt opened the truck door and set the ramp down for Harlan. The shepherd stood at the edge, looked at the ramp, then stepped forward. His right hind leg trembled. Halfway down, he stopped. Wyatt reached for him, but Harlan lowered himself with stubborn care and reached the ground. He made it 3 steps toward the porch before stopping again at the bottom of the wooden steps. Not the ramp, the steps. Wyatt had forgotten to move the ramp from the truck to the porch. Harlan looked at the first step as if it were a mountain. The sight broke through Wyatt more sharply than anything at Maple Cut. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. He had spent the day watching old, frightened dogs pay the price for being considered no longer useful. Now his own dog stood in front of 2 porch steps, hiding pain out of loyalty. "No," Wyatt said quietly. "Not you 2. He went to the shed, found 2 boards, and built a temporary slope before the cold took the feeling from his fingers. Harlan waited without complaint. When the ramp was ready, the old shepherd climbed it slowly and crossed the threshold into the warm cabin. Wyatt stood outside a moment longer. Behind him, Harlan's collar tag clicked softly against the doorframe. Home before dark. Wyatt looked toward the distant glow of town, then farther up toward where Northstar's lights burned somewhere behind the trees. He had promised himself he would not use Harlan like a tool. Now he understood the promise had to be larger than that. No living thing should have to prove its worth by how much longer it could work, pull, guard, comfort, or obey. Some deserved care simply because they had stayed loyal long after the world became unkind. Wyatt stepped inside and closed the door gently behind them. By morning, Alder Creek had learned how to whisper without lowering its voice. The news did not arrive all at once. It moved in pieces, like snow sliding off different roofs at different times. Someone saw the county animal control van coming down from Maple Cut. Someone else saw Dr. Naomi Klein's clinic lights burning past midnight. A rental shop owner heard that Northstar's lower annex had been inspected. By breakfast, the town had built 3 versions of the story, and every version depended on who needed Northstar most. At Marnie's diner, the coffee was hot, the windows were fogged, and nobody was talking about the weather. Wyatt Bramwell sat at the end of the counter with a cup he had not touched. He had come in for screws and lamp oil from the store next door, then made the mistake of stepping inside when Marnie lifted a hand from behind the counter. Harlan was not with him. The old shepherd had slept heavily after Maple Cut, and Wyatt had left him at home on the braided rug near the stove, the temporary porch ramp already dusted with new snow. "3 dogs," said a man from the booth near the pie case. "That's what I heard. 3 dogs taken out. That doesn't mean the whole place is bad." "It means 3 dogs needed taking out," said a woman in a quilted coat. "It means outsiders will hear one ugly thing and cancel reservations," another man answered. "You know what February looks like without Northstar?" Marnie Dubrow, the diner's owner, moved along the counter with a coffee pot in one hand and a towel over her shoulder. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair cut short and sharp eyes that had watched tourists, storms, marriages, arguments, and bad checks pass through her booths for decades. Her diner depended on Northstar's winter visitors more than she liked admitting. She stopped in front of Wyatt. "You stirred up a hard thing," she said. Wyatt looked at her. "I didn't build Maple Cut."
"No,"
Marnie said.
but you came back after 30 years and found the match." The diner went quiet in the way rooms do when people pretend not to listen. Wyatt could have defended himself. He could have said he had not asked Mabel to fall in his road, had not told anyone to leave dogs in cold sheds, had not written numbers where names should have been. But Marnie's face was not cruel. It was tired. "My dishwasher's husband drives shuttle for Northstar," she said. "The woman who rents skis next door has 2 months to make enough for her property taxes. I got a freezer full of food ordered for visitors who may not come if this turns into a scandal." "And the dogs?" Her mouth tightened. "I didn't say ignore them." "No. You just asked if truth could wait until after the busy season." That hurt her. He saw it land. Marnie set the coffee pot down. "You don't get to speak like you stayed, Wyatt." There it was. Not shouted.
Not unfair, exactly. Just the old town wound opening under the new one. He had left Alder Creek for federal forests, long assignments, distant fires, winter search grids far from home. He had come back only after his wife died, and quiet became more necessary than pride. Other people had stayed through empty storefronts, thin winters, bad harvests, medical bills, and the slow humiliation of watching young adults leave for places with better work. Wyatt looked down at his untouched coffee. "You're right," he said. That surprised her. He stood, left money under the cup, and put on his hat. At the door, he paused. "But staying doesn't make wrong things right." No one answered before he stepped into the white morning. At the sheriff's office, Elias Mercer looked as if he had aged another year before noon. 3 members of the town council sat across from his desk. Council Chair Warren Bell wore a gray wool coat and a red face polished by frustration. Beside him, June Haskell from the Chamber of Commerce held a folder of winter booking numbers like a shield. The third, old Pete Naylor, ran the hardware store and said nothing because he disliked conflict until it threatened invoices. Wyatt did not enter at first. He stood in the hallway, close enough to hear through the open door, far enough not to be accused of looming. "We are asking for prudence," Warren Bell said. "No one is telling you to ignore animal welfare." "Good," Elias replied, voice flat. "Because I won't." June Haskell leaned forward. "Words matter. If this becomes Alder Creek Dog Abuse Lodge on regional news, we lose the rest of the season. Northstar hasn't even had a chance to clarify." "Maple Cut had frozen water bowls," Elias said, "which could be a staffing failure. And cost sheets classifying dogs by resale potential." A silence followed. Pete Naylor cleared his throat. "Maybe bring in state people quietly. No public statement yet. Just slow it down." Wyatt heard another voice then, Lorna Pike, calm and hard as packed ice. "Slowing down can be obstruction if evidence is moved." Warren Bell lowered his tone. "Deputy, we respect county procedure. We also respect livelihoods." "So do I," Lorna said. "That is why I prefer not to let a business teach this town that livelihoods require silence." The hallway seems to narrow around Wyatt. He had never liked meetings. Meetings turned suffering into language polished enough to survive minutes. Still, he understood the fear in that room. Fear wore many coats. Sometimes it looked like caution. Sometimes it looked like a budget.
Elias saw Wyatt in the hall and looked away, not from shame, but because the old sheriff was trying to hold too many eyes at once. Wyatt left before anyone could call him in. He drove to Willow Bend. Mabel's house looked smaller after the diner and the sheriff's office. A cottage at the end of a plowed lane, quiet under snow, with wind chimes near the porch moving in a cold breeze. For one moment, Wyatt hoped nothing new had happened there. Then he saw the bag. It sat on the top step, a torn sack of dog food, the cheap kind, split open so brown pellets had scattered across the snow. Tucked under one corner was an old photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. Wyatt picked it up with a gloved hand. A black and white dog with cloudy eyes stood beside Mabel's porch, nose lifted toward the wind chime. On the back, written in block letters, "Sometimes old dogs get lost because someone does not know how to keep them." Wyatt's first feeling was not anger. It was cold. A deep, clean cold that moved through him without haste. Mabel stood in the doorway behind the glass, one hand on the frame. Her face had gone pale, but she had opened the door anyway. "They didn't sign it," she said. "No. Cowards usually don't." Wyatt slipped the photo back into the sleeve and set it on the porch rail. "I'm calling Lorna." Mabel nodded. Her fingers shook, but her voice stayed strangely steady. "Do that. Then come inside before you freeze." Deputy Pike arrived within 20 minutes, photographed the bag, the footprints, the note, the position of everything. She did not make promises she could not keep. She only said it would be documented and that patrol would pass Willow Bend more often. "Do you think Graham sent it?" Mabel asked. Lorna looked at the road, then at the scattered food. "I think someone wanted you to feel alone." That was worse than yes. That evening, Wyatt meant to stay at Mabel's house. He brought extra firewood, checked the locks, tightened the porch light, and set a chair where he could see the driveway. But when he opened the truck door, Harlan stepped down before Wyatt could stop him. The shepherd moved slowly up the ramp, crossed the porch, and lowered himself in front of Mabel's back door. Not dramatic, not fierce, just final. "Harlan," Wyatt said, "you're supposed to be resting." The dog did not move. Mabel stood in the kitchen, wrapped in a cream cardigan, watching him through the screen. Something in her face softened until she looked, for a moment, less like a frightened old woman and more like the person in the photograph on her wall, kneeling among dogs with Amos beside her. "I slept badly for weeks," she said. "Last night, in your house, I slept because he was near the door." Wyatt looked down at Harlan. The old dog's hip trembled faintly under his coat, but his head stayed lifted. "He can't stop a person determined to do harm," Wyatt said. "No," Mabel answered. "But he can remind one old woman that someone believed her." The words settled deeper than comfort. Wyatt left Harlan there for 2 hours while he sat inside with Mabel and called Naomi to check on the dogs from Maple Cut. Harlan slept only in pieces, waking whenever tires hissed on the distant road. He never barked. He did not have to. Across town, Tessa Rowe sat in Graham Voss's office with her hands folded around the small silver bell keychain her mother had given her years earlier. The office at Northstar smelled of leather, cedar polish, and expensive coffee. Through the window behind Graham's desk, the public courtyard glowed with tasteful light. Guests moved like figures inside a snow globe. Graham did not sit behind the desk at first. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind him, the concerned director grieving a misunderstanding. "Tessa," he said, "I need to know what you told them." She kept her eyes on her hands. "The truth I knew firsthand." "That sounds rehearsed." "It was advised." "By Deputy Pike?" Tessa did not answer. Graham turned.
His face remained kind. That was what made the room feel dangerous. "When your mother needed medication last winter, who advanced your pay?" he asked. Tessa's fingers tightened around the bell until its edge bit her palm. "You did?" "When the hospital billing office called twice in 1 week, who gave you extra shifts instead of replacing you?" "You did?" "When half these dogs arrived half-starved from people who claimed to love them, who paid to feed them?" Tessa looked up then. "Some of them are still hungry." For the first time, Graham's smile thinned. "Because resources are real," he said. "Good intentions do not buy food, heat, insurance, staff, fuel, veterinary support, property taxes. Kindness does not exist if no one can pay for it." The sentence struck because it almost sounded true. Tessa thought of dogs in the public yard with clean coats and full bowls. Dogs who had been helped. Dogs who would be alive because Northstar had taken them. Then she thought of maple cut, of frozen water, of codes instead of names, of a hound watching hands as if hands were weather. "My mother asked me something," she said. Graham waited. "She asked if I was caring for dogs or guarding a jail." His expression cooled fully now. Not anger, disappointment sharpened into control. "Your mother does not understand operations." "No," Tessa said. "But she understands patience." When Graham dismissed her, he did it softly. That frightened her more than shouting would have. The community meeting happened the next night in the basement of St. Bartholomew's Church. There were no banners, no microphones, no public announcement. Just folding tables, coffee in dented urns, adult volunteers in winter coats, and snow tapping against the narrow basement windows. Naomi came from the clinic with medical intake sheets. Lorna came with her orange notebook. Elias came without his hat, which made him look less like an office and more like a tired man. Wyatt brought Mabel, and Harlan stayed home under strict orders from Naomi, which he accepted with visible contempt. Mabel carried her blue notebook against her chest. At first, people talked around the matter. They discussed procedure, donations, bad press, whether the 3 removed dogs were improving, whether Northstar should be given time to respond. Marnie was there, arms crossed. Pete Naylor from the hardware store sat near the back. A shuttle driver stared at the floor. A retired mechanic named Calvin Rusk sat alone at the far end, turning a worn leash over in his hands. Mabel did not make a speech. She sat at a table with Naomi and began writing on paper tags. Not names first, descriptions. Male hound, gray muzzle, left hip stiff. Black shepherd mix, circles when afraid. Tan female, startles at metal gate. For the ones Naomi had scanned, Mabel matched numbers to her notebook when she could. When a name fit, she wrote it carefully in blue ink, not theatrically, not for applause, as if correcting a mistake the world had made. The room quieted on its own. Calvin Rusk stood so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. He was 66, thin and stooped, with a denim jacket lined in worn fleece and a face shaped by work, weather, and apology. His beard had grown in uneven white patches, and his eyes stayed down even when people turned toward him. "Otis?" he said. Mabel looked up. Calvin lifted the leash in his hand. "Old hound, bad left hip. Love the south window." He swallowed. "Mine." No one moved. "I couldn't pay for the surgery they said he might need. Northstar had a program. Said older dogs could be evaluated, maybe placed quiet if they couldn't work. I signed papers because I thought." His voice broke, not loudly, but completely. "I thought I was giving him a better chance than me." Mabel's pen hovered over the tag. "What happened?" Naomi asked gently. "They called 3 weeks later. Said he declined. Said he passed peaceful. I asked for records. They said they'd send them." Calvin looked at the leash.
Never did. I was ashamed to keep asking. Shame moved through the room like a draft under a door. Not Calvin's alone. Other faces changed. A woman near the coffee urn covered her mouth. Pete Naylor stared at his boots. Marnie's crossed arms loosened. Lorna wrote every word. Elias did not. He was watching Calvin, and Wyatt saw something in the sheriff's face finally settle past fear. After the meeting, Naomi stood near the urn and spoke quietly but clearly. My clinic has accepted support from Northstar in the past. Heated kennel units, small equipment grants. Until this investigation is resolved, I am withdrawing from all direct Northstar funding and documenting prior contact. I will not have my report used against these animals because I failed to say that out loud. No one applauded. It would have been wrong if they had. Elias stepped forward next. I will be requesting expanded inspection authority, he said.
County and state, if needed. I will also make a statement that the investigation is active, limited to facts, and not a license to harass anyone involved. Warren Bell from the council was not there to object, but his shadow was. So was Graham's. So was every unpaid bill in town. Elias seemed to feel them all. He continued anyway. This may cost us, he said, but if the cost of a season is silence about suffering, then we have already paid too much. Wyatt looked at Mabel. She was not smiling. Her hands were folded over the notebook, and her eyes were wet but clear. The blue pen lay beside a tag where she had written Otis in careful letters. Outside, snow kept falling on the warm windows of Alder Creek. The town had not chosen truth yet. Not fully. But for the first time, it had stopped pretending the question belonged only to an old woman, a retired ranger, and a few dogs no one wanted to count. The storm announced itself before the snow arrived. It came first in the way the air changed over Alder Creek, turning sharp and metallic by mid-afternoon. The lake lost its silver shine and became a flat, dark plate under the clouds. At the grocery store, people bought bread, batteries, coffee, and road salt with the quiet seriousness of villagers who had learned not to argue with weather. By 4 o'clock, the mountains west of town had disappeared behind a white curtain. Tessa Rowe called Deputy Lorna Pike at 4:17. She did not sound brave. That mattered, because brave voices could be performed. Tessa sounded frightened enough to be telling the truth. They're moving dogs tonight, she said. Not all. Some from Maple Cut, some from the lower annex behind the equipment shed. There's a box truck at the service yard, heated crates, paperwork bins, a portable server case. Graham said it's storm protocol. Lorna, sitting in the sheriff's office with Elias Mercer and a stack of forms still warm from the printer, put the call on speaker after asking permission. What did you personally see? She asked. Crates. 2 transport staff. Graham carrying a black waterproof document case, a portable drive case from the admin office. I saw the truck number. I saw dogs listed by codes on the load sheet. I didn't take anything. Good, Lorna said. Do not take anything. Do not touch records. Do not block anyone. Where are you now? In my car by the staff housing road. Stay there. Lock the doors. If anyone asks, you felt sick and left. I do feel sick. That helps. Wyatt Bramwell stood near the wall, arms folded, listening without stepping into the middle of it. That had been difficult for him all week. It was still difficult. Men who had spent their lives being useful often mistook restraint for failure. Harlan was not at the sheriff's office. He was at Wyatt's cabin, sleeping by the stove under strict orders from Dr. Naomi Klein, who had said, with no softness at all, that if Wyatt dragged that old shepherd into another field operation, she would personally rehome Wyatt somewhere with stairs. Wyatt had not argued. Much. Elias ended the call with Tessa and looked at Lorna. Do we have enough? Lorna had already opened her orange notebook. We have the expanded inspection request approved for Maple Cut and associated animal holding structures. We have welfare concerns, transfer inconsistencies, and now a reported attempt to move animals and relevant records during a storm after notice of investigation. Elias rubbed one hand over his face. The fear was there again. Not cowardice, not reluctance to protect the dogs. The old scar of a case done wrong. Lorna's voice lowered. Sheriff, this is the moment your caution is for, not against. He looked at her. She continued, we do it clean. We document. We move animals for welfare reasons only. We hold records covered by the order. We do not chase drama. We do not let weather become an accomplice. Elias nodded once. Then he picked up the radio. The plan came together in pieces, not heroics. Naomi brought 2 veterinary technicians from the clinic, both adults used to frightened animals and bad roads. Ben Trask from County Animal Control brought heated transport crates, extra leads, muzzles that Naomi hoped not to use, and a van already lined with thermal blankets. A registered rescue organization from the next county sent a woman named Lydia Marsh with a boxy white transport vehicle and the calm efficiency of someone who had moved abused animals through worse nights than this one. Lydia had short gray hair, a square jaw, and a habit of speaking to dogs before people, which made Naomi trust her immediately. The basement of St. Bartholomew's Church became the intake station. No banners, no speeches, no crowd. Just folding tables, towels, clean bowls, extension cords taped to the floor, portable heaters checked twice, and adult volunteers moving quietly under Naomi's instructions. Mabel Corcoran sat at one end of a table wearing fingerless gloves, her blue notebook open, a stack of blank paper tags beside her. Calvin Rusk stood near the wall with his old leash in his hands, waiting for a dog he was afraid to hope for. Wyatt arrived with Harlan just before dusk. Naomi saw them and pointed at him across the room. He stays here. He is here, Wyatt said. Here means here, not in your truck, not near Maple Cut, not within range of your bad ideas. Harlan lowered himself onto a thick blanket near the intake area as if the discussion bored him. Mabel leaned down and placed one hand near his shoulder, not on the sore hip. You and me, then, she whispered. We'll hold the door. Wyatt heard it. He did not trust himself to answer. Outside, the first hard snow began to fall. The convoy left town without sirens. Wyatt rode with Elias and Lorna because his knowledge of the old service roads could keep people from sliding into ditches, and because Lorna had made it clear that advisory capacity meant he advised when asked and shut up when not. He pointed out the narrow bend below the sugar maples where black ice formed early. He warned them not to park near the culvert by the lower track because meltwater ran beneath the snow there. He marked, on Lorna's paper map, the old logging spur Graham might use if he wanted to avoid the main road and the county vehicle at the front gate. The storm thickened. Headlights became tunnels. Wind pushed snow sideways across the windshield. Radio chatter came in broken lines. Animal control staged. Rescue van approaching church. Naomi confirming medical kit. Tessa still safe in her vehicle. Northstar service yard active. At Maple Cut, the world narrowed to light, breath, and procedure. Lorna stepped out first and filmed the approach. Elias identified himself at the service gate. Ben and Naomi waited until the scene was cleared for entry. Wyatt stood back by the sheriff's SUV, collar turned up, reading the slope, the wind, the tire impressions already filling with snow. This was not a raid. That made it tenser. A raid had noise to hide inside. This had rules, and rules required people to remain themselves. The lower annex was worse than the first inspection had allowed them to see, not because it was full of open horror, but because it had been prepared to become empty.
Crates stood stacked near the wide door. Several dogs had already been moved from their runs into transport boxes, blankets thrown over the doors to keep them quiet. Some crates were labeled with numbers only. Naomi's face changed when she saw them. "Temperature checks first," she said. "No fast handling. Ben, you and Lydia on crate stability. No one lifts until I clear." Lorna recorded every crate before anyone touched it. Elias signed the temporary removal authorizations where welfare risk justified it. A dog with cracked paw pads and a fever went first, then a thin shepherd mix whose breathing sounded wet, then a hound too weak to stand, wrapped in a blanket by Lydia, who murmured, "Easy, old man. Nobody needs you to earn the ride." Wyatt stayed near the loading door, holding a flashlight when asked. A younger deputy started toward a crate too quickly, eager to help. The dog inside slammed backward, striking plastic. "Stop," Wyatt said, sharp enough that the deputy froze. Lorna looked over. Wyatt lowered his voice. "Side approach. Kneel if Naomi says. Don't loom. Frightened dogs read height before intention." The deputy swallowed, nodded, and stepped back. That was Wyatt's work now, not command, not rescue by force, small corrections that prevented fear from becoming injury. Near the equipment shed, Elias found the box truck Tessa had described. Its rear doors were closed, but not locked. Inside were more crates, empty for now, plus thermal liners, tie-down straps, and a clipboard with load numbers. Lorna photographed it all. Then Graham Voss appeared. He came from the direction of the admin building, wearing a black parka, leather gloves, and a calm expression so polished it seemed weatherproof. In one hand, he carried a black waterproof case. Behind him, a staff member pulled a smaller wheeled case through the snow. "Sheriff Mercer," Graham said, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the wind. "This is an unsafe interference with storm preparation." Lorna stepped forward. "Mr. Voss, set the cases down." "These are operating records and backup drives. We are moving them to a secure location in case of power loss." "You are under an active investigation involving animal transport records. Those cases fall within preservation order scope." Graham's eyes moved once to Wyatt. Not long. Enough. "Mr. Bramwell," he said. "Still advising?" Wyatt did not answer. Lorna did. "Cases down." For the first time, Graham looked almost disappointed. Not caught. Disappointed that people had refused to follow the story he had prepared. He set one case down. The staff member hesitated with the wheeled one. "Now," Elias said. The staff member let go. Graham sighed softly. "You are allowing emotion to damage a working system that supports this town." "No," Elias said. "We are documenting whether the system has been feeding on what it claimed to protect." The words surprised everyone, including Elias. Graham's face cooled. A radio crackled from the SUV. A deputy posted near the old logging spur reported movement, a snowmobile leaving the service yard's rear track. Lorna's head snapped toward Wyatt. "Logging spur?" she asked. "Northwest cut," Wyatt said. "It drops toward the lake road. Bad ice near the lower bend." "Can he get out?" "If he thinks he knows it better than weather." Lorna spoke into her radio, calm and fast. Units already positioned at both exits moved in. No one chased blindly. No one tore down the trail for drama. The deputy near the lower bend reported minutes later that the snowmobile had stopped near the ice shelf, stuck before the final rise. The rider had a document pouch under his jacket and claimed he was securing maintenance logs. Not Graham, a transport supervisor. But when Lorna opened the waterproof case Graham had set down, with Elias and Naomi witnessing, the contents made the storm outside seem less cold. Inside were printed transfer schedules, donation campaign summaries, dog code lists, invoices from Shell transport contractors, and a portable drive sealed in a padded sleeve. Not enough to try in the church basement. More than enough to show why the documents had been moving. Graham's voice remained steady. You don't understand context. Lorna sealed the case. That is what evidence review is for. The dogs mattered first.
By the time the convoy returned to St. Bartholomew's, snow had covered the church steps twice. Volunteers shoveled in shifts. The basement smelled of wet wool, warm towels, coffee, and frightened dogs. Harlan lifted his head before the first crate came through the door. Mabel sat straighter. Naomi entered with snow in her hair and exhaustion across her face. "Slow intake," she called. "One at a time. No crowding. Let the crates face the wall until we assess." The room obeyed. That was the mercy of practical people. They knew when not to turn suffering into spectacle. Mabel wrote. For dogs with verified chips, she wrote names. For those not yet confirmed, she wrote what could be known without pretending. Female, left ear torn, startles at metal. Male, gray muzzle, will not eat standing. Black shepherd mix, circles when afraid. Her handwriting shook, but it stayed legible. Calvin Rusk stood near the far wall, both hands wrapped around Otis's old leash. He had not asked once if his dog was among them. Hope had made him polite in a painful way. Naomi scanned a gray-muzzled hound brought in under a tan blanket. The scanner beeped. Naomi checked the number against the intake sheet. Then she looked at Mabel. Mabel looked at Calvin. "Otis," she said softly. Calvin did not move. The hound raised his head a few inches. His cloudy eyes searched the room without understanding it. His left hip trembled under the blanket. Calvin sank slowly into a chair because standing had become too much. "Don't rush him," Naomi said. "I won't," Calvin whispered. For several minutes, nothing happened. That was the hardest part. The room kept moving around them. Tags were written, blankets changed, a dog whined, someone refilled warm water. Calvin sat with his hands open on his knees. At last, Otis lowered his nose toward the floor, sniffed once, and stretched his neck just far enough to touch the toe of Calvin's boot. Calvin covered his mouth with one hand. He did not grab the dog. He did not say anything grand. He only bent over the old leash in his lap and shook like a man receiving both forgiveness and a wound at the same time. Harlan, from his blanket near the intake table, exhaled slowly and put his head back down. The basement seemed to breathe with him. Hours passed in fragments. A dog with infected pads went to Naomi's clinic. 2 others stayed in heated crates under Lydia's watch. Lorna came in with sealed document bags and snow crusted along her shoulders. Elias followed, quieter than he had been when he left town. He looked at the dogs, the tags, Mabel's blue notebook, Calvin sitting beside Otis's crate, and said nothing. Words would not have improved the room. Near midnight, Naomi brought Wyatt a sheet from one of the seized transport folders. "Juneau," she said. Mabel heard the name from across the table. The room did not stop, but it listened. Naomi laid the paper down. "She was moved off Maple Cut 10 to 14 days ago. Storm delay near the Lake Road. There's a note about a door latch failure during a stop." Mabel's fingers closed around her pen. "Dead?" she asked. "No record of death." No one mistook that for good news. Wyatt thought of Orville Keene at the diner, stirring coffee he had not sweetened. Tracks near the old boathouse again. Ghost dog, maybe. He looked at Mabel. She did not cry loudly. She did not collapse. She placed her hand flat over the page in her notebook where Juneau's name had been written years ago, the ink slightly faded from being touched too many times. "She knew the wind chime," Mabel said. Wyatt nodded. "And cedar," she added. "She liked cedar." Outside, the storm pressed against the church windows, rattling them in their frames. No one could search the lake road that night, not safely, not without becoming one more emergency. Mabel understood before anyone told her. She closed the notebook with careful hands. "Tomorrow," she said. "If the weather gives us a road, we call her again." Harlan lifted his head at her voice. This time he did not stand. He was too tired, too old, too wise, perhaps, to pretend strength meant rising every time sorrow entered a room. He only looked at Mabel, steady and awake. And in that look, Wyatt saw the shape of the night's unfinished mercy. Many had been brought through the door, but one name still waited somewhere out in the white. Northstar Lodge did not collapse with a crash. It came apart the way ice leaves a river in late winter, first with cracks no one could ignore, then in slabs, then in a long, cold movement that changed the shape of everything around it. By the second morning after the storm, the main lodge still stood above Alder Creek with its red timber walls, stone chimneys, and polished windows. Snow still lay clean across the roofs. The courtyard lights still glowed at dusk because no one had thought to turn them off yet. From the road, it could almost pass for the same beautiful place visitors had photographed a week before. But the lower gates were locked. A county notice hung near the entrance, sealed in plastic against the weather. Temporary suspension, active investigation, animal welfare violations, review pending. People stopped to read it without getting out of their trucks. Some crossed themselves, some shook their heads. Some looked angry enough to spit. A few only sat behind their windshields, engines running, staring at the sign as if it had personally betrayed them. Graham Voss was not dragged through town in handcuffs for everyone to see. That would have made the story easier than it was. He was processed quietly after the evidence review expanded. Unlawful animal transport, falsified records, fraudulent donation campaigns, obstruction, and animal cruelty tied to documented neglect. Lawyers arrived before some of the rescued dogs could stand without trembling. Statements were issued. Words like misunderstanding, operational complexity, and isolated errors appeared in print, as if language could warm a frozen water bowl. Alder Creek read every word, and still had to decide what to do with itself afterward. The town was not healed by the truth. At Marnie's Diner, 2 tables stayed empty the first Saturday after the investigation became public. The rental shop next door cut its hours. The shuttle driver who used to take visitors up to Northstar began offering rides to the smaller ski trails instead, though there were not enough customers to fill the van. Some people thanked Wyatt Bramwell when they saw him on Main Street. Others looked away. A few looked directly at him with the kind of resentment that did not need courage because it had bills behind it. Marnie herself said nothing for 3 days. On the 4th, she poured Wyatt coffee without asking and set the cup in front of him. "Don't look grateful," she said. "I'm still mad." Wyatt nodded. "Fair. I'm mad at him more." She meant Graham. Her jaw tightened. "And at myself a little. That part's inconvenient." Wyatt took the cup in both hands. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the diner awning in a slow, steady rhythm. "Truth usually is," he said. Marnie snorted. "You sound like a man who has not had to redo a supply order." He almost smiled. That was how Alder Creek began to move forward, not with forgiveness, not with applause, but with people saying smaller, true things than they had said before. Sheriff Elias Mercer paid for his choice. The town council questioned his timing, his judgment, his communication, and his decision to request expanded authority during peak winter business. Elias attended every meeting in his brown sheriff's coat, looking tired but no longer uncertain. Deputy Lorna Pike sat beside him at the county sessions with her burnt orange notebook open, correcting timelines whenever someone tried to soften them. There will be independent inspection for any business using animals in paid recreation, Lorna said at one meeting, her tone even enough to make argument feel childish. Medical records will be available for audit. Microchip verification before transfer. Transport cameras stored off-site. No single director moves animals without third-party confirmation. One councilman called it burdensome. Elias answered before Lorna could. So was looking at those kennels. The room went quiet after that. Dr. Naomi Klein's clinic became the place where the truth had to be touched. No report, no legal charge, no town meeting could replace the daily work of cleaning wounds, changing bandages, coaxing food into frightened mouths, and learning which sounds made which dog fold into itself. Naomi did not speak in miracles. She spoke in temperature, hydration, infection risk, muscle loss, stress response, and time. Time is medicine if you don't ruin it, she told Wyatt one afternoon. The dogs recovered unevenly. Marrow, the old husky mix whose discovery had helped open Maple Cut, slept for nearly 2 days except when Naomi woke him for small meals. The black shepherd mix who had struck the metal gate would not enter a crate unless the door was left open for several minutes first. A tan female learned to eat if someone sat with their back to her instead of facing her. Otis, Calvin Rusk's old hound, accepted his former owner slowly, not as if nothing had happened, but as if forgiveness had to be sniffed first. Calvin came every day. He never demanded. He never reached too soon. He sat in the corner of the clinic with his cap in his hands and waited for Otis to decide how close memory could safely come. On the 9th day, Otis placed his head on Calvin's boot and fell asleep. Calvin cried so quietly that no one mentioned it. Tessa Rowe was not welcomed back into the circle of good people all at once. She did not expect to be. She gave statements, accepted responsibility for the forms she had signed, and sat through interviews where every answer seemed to pull another thread from the life she thought she had been managing. Her mother, Elaine, came once to Naomi's clinic to pick her up. Elaine Rowe was 70, thin and upright despite the illness that had made money such a weapon in Graham's hands. She walked with a cane and the steady gaze of a woman who had spent years reading pain charts and knowing when patients lied about how much it hurt. Tessa was rinsing bowls in the utility sink when Elaine saw her. "You look awful," Elaine said. Tessa gave a tired laugh. "Thanks." Elaine glanced toward the kennels, where a dog with a bandaged paw watched Tessa without shrinking. "Are you caring now?" Tessa looked down at the bowl in her hands. "I'm trying." Elaine nodded once. "Then keep trying." It was not forgiveness. It was a door left unlatched. Mabel Corcoran moved through those weeks with her blue notebook under her arm and a strength that did not look like strength from far away. She did not lift crates. She did not argue at meetings. She did not stand in front of cameras, though a regional reporter tried twice to get her to speak. Mabel only came to the church, the clinic, and the foster homes with her pen and paper tags. For dogs with names, she wrote the names. For dogs without confirmed names, she wrote what was true for now. Male, gray face, sleeps better near wall. Female, left ear torn, startled by metal bowls. Young adult, black coat, needs food placed low. When a microchip report came back, or an old owner was located, or a record matched, Mabel crossed out the temporary description with one thin line and wrote the name beneath it in blue ink. Not over it, beneath it. Because what we knew before still mattered, she told Wyatt when he asked. But Juneau's page remained open. The old dog had not been found in the first days after the storm. No body had been recovered either. That absence kept hope alive and cruel at the same time. The seized records showed Juneau had been moved off Maple Cut 10 to 14 days before the rescue operation. There had been a storm delay near the lake road, a note about a door latch failure, and then no clean entry after that. Mabel read the lines so often the papers softened under her finger. Juneau. Hates metal doors. Sleeps better with cedar. Knows the porch chime. She is either gone, Mabel said one evening, or she is somewhere trying not to be. Wyatt did not offer comfort he could not prove. Instead, he began clearing out the old storage barn behind his cabin. At first, it was practical. Naomi needed foster space for dogs too stable for the clinic but not ready for ordinary homes. Lydia Marsh's rescue group could register a temporary foster site if the building met basic requirements. Lorna helped Wyatt understand the forms. Elias found a small county emergency grant. The church collected blankets, towels, spare bowls, and 2 donated kennel panels from a retired groomer. Marnie sent coffee in a dented thermos and claimed it was because she had made too much. Wyatt replaced rotted boards, sealed cracks, installed safe heat, widened 3 stalls, and built low platforms where old dogs would not have to sleep on concrete. He worked slowly, sometimes angrily, sometimes late into the night after Harlan had fallen asleep. Harlan supervised from a pile of folded moving blankets. The old shepherd's hip had worsened after maple cut. Naomi put him on rest, supplements, and a look of warning so severe even Wyatt obeyed. Wyatt built a permanent ramp from the cabin porch to the yard, then another into the barn. Harlan used both with the dignity of a retired judge accepting accommodations he had not requested. Winterdoor Haven began with 3 dogs. Not a shelter, not a grand rescue, not a new institution with a logo and a fundraising video. A registered foster site with a clean floor, warm water, medical oversight, and limits. Wyatt wrote the limits on a sheet and taped it near the door, because he knew men like him could confuse guilt with capacity. Maximum intake, 5. Veterinary approval required. No dog placed for usefulness. No loyal heart waits outside. He wrote the last line without thinking much about it, then stood looking at it longer than the others. The words stayed. When the first dog settled in the barn without shaking, Wyatt felt something in his chest move that was not triumph. More like a hinge, stiff from disuse. A week later, the thaw began. Not spring yet. Vermont did not give spring away cheaply. But the sun stayed a little longer. Snow softened at the edges of the road. Ice dripped from gutters. The lake groaned under its frozen skin. That was when Orville Keene came to the cabin. He arrived just after breakfast in his brown parka, carrying his green tin bake box under one arm. Harlan lifted his head from the rug and watched him through the glass. Wyatt opened the door. Orville did not step inside. "Saw tracks again," he said. Wyatt went still. "Where?" "Old boathouse, back pilings. Bigger than fox, not coyote. Dogs favoring one side." Orville scratched his beard. "Also, the scraps are gone." "You saw the dog?" "A shape." Orville looked toward the lake road. "White and dark. Didn't move like a wild thing. Moved like something tired of being looked at." Within an hour, Wyatt, Mabel, Naomi, and Harlan were on the lake road. Naomi almost refused Harlan, but Mabel intervened quietly.
"If we find her, Juneau may know him better than she knows us right now. Not by name, by calm." Naomi looked at the old shepherd standing beside Wyatt's truck, then pointed at Wyatt. "Slow, short, no pulling. If he limps, he goes back." "Yes, ma'am," Wyatt said. "I dislike how easily you say that." "I mean it in fear." "Acceptable." The old boathouse stood where the lake road bent behind a stand of cedar and white birch. It had been unused for years, leaning toward the ice as if listening to water move beneath it. The boards had silvered with age. A small wind chime hung near the side door, forgotten by whoever had once kept boats there. It moved in the thawing breeze with a thin, gentle sound.
Mabel stopped when she heard it. The air smelled of cedar, old rope, lake ice, and fish. Orville had left scraps beneath an overturned crate near the back wall. They were gone. Beside them, in the dust and old straw, were paw marks. Harlan moved slowly ahead, not tracking like a young dog, not pulling Wyatt forward. He simply followed the shape of scent and silence, step by careful step. His nails clicked softly on the wood. Naomi stayed close behind, medical bag ready. Mabel waited in the doorway, one hand against the frame. "Juneau," she called, not loudly. The boathouse held the name for a moment. From the far corner came a sound so small, Wyatt might have missed it if Harlan had not stopped. A breath. A shift. Behind a stack of old cedar planks and a folded tarp, something dark and white lay curled tight against the wall. Naomi moved first, then stopped herself. "Slow," she whispered. Juneau lifted her head. She was older than the photograph, thinner than any dog should have been, her coat dulled by weather and fear. One ear lay ragged against her skull. Her eyes were cloudy, but when the wind chime moved again, they opened a little wider. Mabel made a sound that was not quite a sob. Naomi held up one hand. "Do not rush her." Mabel nodded, already crying, but she stayed where she was. That restraint was the bravest thing Wyatt saw that day. Harlan lowered himself carefully to the floor. He did not approach Juneau. He did what he had done all winter. He made himself small. His head rested between his paws, his breathing slowed. Juneau watched him. Then Mabel knelt, one hand braced on the old door frame, and placed her palm flat on the floorboards. "Juneau?" she said again. "It's Mabel." The dog's tail moved once, barely, a brush against the tarp, but it moved. No one spoke after that for several seconds. The lake cracked somewhere beyond the wall. The wind chime trembled. Wyatt felt the moment pass through him quietly, without spectacle. This was not victory in the way people liked to imagine victory. Juneau was alive, but not well. She would need fluids, warmth, treatment, time. She might never fully trust a closed door again. Mabel had found her, but could not erase the days she had spent hungry and hidden in the cold. Nothing about this made the past harmless. Still, a name had reached what it was meant to reach, and a living creature had answered. They carried Juneau out, wrapped in a warmed blanket from Naomi's truck. Mabel walked beside her, one hand hovering near but not touching until Naomi allowed it. Harlan followed slowly, leaning hard against Wyatt's leg by the time they reached the road. Wyatt did not hurry him. Weeks later, the sign went up at Winterdoor Haven. Wyatt carved it from pine himself. The letters were uneven because his hands were better with axes and latches than with fine work. But Mabel said uneven letters looked more honest. "No loyal heart waits outside." He mounted it beside the barn door at eye level. By then, Alder Creek had not become pure. No town did. Some people still blamed Wyatt for lost bookings. Some still defended Northstar by saying Graham had done good before he did wrong, as if good could be stored in a bank and spent against cruelty. Tessa still carried shame, though now she carried water buckets and clean blankets with it. Elias still faced council anger, though he no longer looked away first. Naomi still refused to call recovery anything but work. Juneau slept in a wide stall lined with cedar shavings. Otis visited when Calvin could bring him. Harlan spent most afternoons near the barn door, where sunlight reached the floor. Sometimes a frightened dog would settle because he was there. Sometimes none did. Harlan did not seem offended by either outcome. Old loyalty did not demand applause. On the first morning that felt almost like spring, Wyatt opened the barn door and let the cool air in. The ramp he had built for Harlan crossed the threshold gently. The old shepherd stepped onto it, paused in the light, and looked back at Wyatt as if waiting. Wyatt touched the brass compass in his pocket. For years he had thought his last duty had ended somewhere behind him, in a forest, on a search line, beside a hospital bed, in a quiet house after condolences stopped coming. He had mistaken silence for peace because silence asked so little. But peace, he was learning, did not mean nothing scratched at the door. Sometimes peace meant opening it anyway. Mabel arrived later with her blue notebook and a bag of soft treats. She stood under the sign and read it as she did every time, lips moving slightly. "No loyal heart waits outside," she said. Wyatt looked at Harlan, at Juneau sleeping under cedar, at the rows of clean bowls, at the snow loosening its grip on the yard. "No," he said. "Not here." And for the first time in a long while, the quiet around him did not feel like a closed door. It felt like room. In the end, this story reminds us that kindness is not proven by the words we put on a sign, but by the doors we choose to open when no one is watching. Wyatt, Mabel, Harlan, and the people of Alder Creek learned that doing what is right may cost comfort, approval, or even a season of easy peace. But a life is not less worthy because it is old, wounded, quiet, or no longer useful. Sometimes God leads us through small, trembling moments. A weak knock at the door, a name written in a notebook, a loyal dog lying silently beside someone afraid. And if we listen, those small moments can become the beginning of mercy. May we all have the courage to protect what cannot speak for itself, and may our homes be places where no loyal heart is left outside. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories of loyalty, courage, and hope, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one.